Hey guys, welcome to Hippie in a Suit, where every week I talk about sustainability. Why, you ask? Because I dream of a world where women get paid the same as men for doing the same stuff.
Cool!
We've all been dealing with the pandemic for what feels like forever, and it's been extremely hard on everyone. And I think we're all still grappling with what the pandemic means for us personally, and then also what it means for society as a whole. So I wanted to start a new series on my channel that examines how the pandemic is affecting certain dimensions of sustainability and sustainable development. The idea here is to examine those areas that we need to be aware of so that when we build back better, we can start to address them and use this as a wake-up call or an opportunity to do better. But I did want to note that I do know it might be hard and anxiety-inducing to talk about some of these issues that are subsets of what's already a once-in-a-lifetime crisis and a difficult thing to deal with. But my intention here is to create the space so that we're aware of these things and that we can address them in the future. In my first video in this series, I'm going to go over how the pandemic is affecting gender equality and women's rights. So let's dive in. Gender equality is the fifth sustainable development goal and is focused on advancing the rights of women and girls as well as realizing their opportunities. Prior to 2020, we'd seen some promising progress, such as lower rates of early childhood marriage, as well as more women in leadership positions, both in business and in government. But there were still some persistent issues, such as a large gender pay gap, the non-recognition of labor in the home and unpaid care work, and of course, the huge problem of violence against women and girls, whether it be sexual, domestic, or otherwise. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, there was a discourse that developed around how actually men were catching the virus more than women and it was having a greater effect on them. But what we saw as time went on is that women were facing the brunt of the societal impacts that were a result of the pandemic. So in this video, I'm going to touch on three of them to give you a sense of the challenges we face as we recover and why it's so crucial that we utilize a gender lens in any post-pandemic recovery. The first and maybe the most troubling impact of the pandemic on women has been the terrifying surge in domestic violence as a result of the lockdowns. Women have been in closer proximity with their abusers, and also it's been a heightened time of stress for families and couples and individuals of all sorts. So this has caused a really difficult situation on the front of domestic violence, so much so that the United Nations has referred to this as a shadow pandemic. While it's impossible to know exactly how bad the problem is because so much domestic violence goes unreported, what we do know is that in some countries we've seen rates of 20 to 30% higher reporting of these issues, and frankly, that's terrifying. There are so many organizations and shelters that help women in these very difficult times, and I really encourage everyone to have a look in your local community to see where you might support, because these problems will persist regardless of the levels of lockdown. The second area where women have faced more challenges due to the pandemic is actually in both paid and unpaid work. So I'm going to start with the paid work because it's relatively easy to explain, and then we'll go into the unpaid second. So the first thing to know about paid work is that women hold 70% of the jobs related to health and social services in our society. So this logically means that women, to a greater extent, are the ones on the front lines fighting the pandemic, facing it head on every single day. Additionally, according to UN Women, statistically and across the globe, women earn less, save less, are in less stable jobs, and are more likely to be employed in the informal economy. This means they're more vulnerable to job losses or layoffs. And we've seen evidence of this in early 2021 when the US jobs report found that of all the 140,000 net job loss, 100% were women. And then we add to that the unpaid labor, the unpaid work dimension. Even before the pandemic, women were doing 3 times as many hours of unpaid labor as men. With children to be homeschooled, more time spent in the home, and potentially even sick family members to help and tend to, the overall domestic burden and unpaid labor fell very harshly on both men and women alike. But given previous trends, it is assumed that more of that will have fallen on women, and the question is what this will mean for leadership in the future. As of 2019, and according to statistics, women made up 50% of the world's population, 39% of its global workforce, but only 28% of its managerial positions. It is expected that we will see a leadership deficit in women advancing because of this pandemic, because of all the extra work they had to take on outside of their jobs that doesn't allow for advancement within their jobs. Not to mention the mental health burden and the overall difficulties in dealing with this very difficult situation. And the last link between the pandemic and gender equality that I want to discuss is difficult to talk about. The pandemic has created a very precarious situation for millions of girls around the world. As we know, millions of girls around the world anyway are susceptible to early child marriage when they're under the age of 18 and pregnancy. And some of the greatest fighting tools that we have against this issue is education and poverty alleviation. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we have seen 800 million girls be disrupted in their education and 90 to 117 million girls falling into poverty. So what does this mean? Well, when women have less education, when girls have less education, they have less economic opportunity and therefore are more likely to be susceptible to early child marriage, as well as when families are dealing with poverty crises and are struggling to put food on the table. It is well documented that this can lead to them essentially not giving away their child, but in having their child enter a child marriage in order for that daughter to be taken care of. Save the Children anticipates that this pandemic has put 500,000 girls already in 2020 in risk of child marriage, and this will rise to 2.5 million girls by 2025. This basically erases all the amazing progress that had been made on this issue over the past number of decades, and therefore is quite a massive problem. However, I say this because we do have a choice, we do have options in how we respond and recover from this pandemic. The way we respond to COVID-19 can be a way to boost and accelerate women's advancement and the lives of girls. I want to underscore how important it is that we take a gender lens approach to our recovery and that we put women at the table to make decisions about their own futures. So with that, I'm going to close for today. Thank you all so much for sticking with me in this quite difficult subject matter. As always, I have put together a blog post that summarizes this issue, as well as links to my research and resources for additional reading. And I've included a number of very great organizations who work in this space who I recommend supporting so that we can make sure that COVID recovery includes women and girls. If you took something from this video, please give me a like below. And if you have any questions, pop them in the comments and I'll do my best to provide some additional resources where you can look. Thank you so much for tuning in to Hippie in a Suit. I hope to see you in the next one. And in the meantime, keep fighting the good fight. Bye.